Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 72 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. This week's tip, use a big face. Now imagine you're having a chat with a close friend or colleague. Maybe you're sitting in the same office or next to each other waiting for a meeting to start. You're likely maybe a couple, 2-3 feet away. You say something slightly sarcastic with a subtle smirk. She gets it, and you go back and forth chatting, but you both say so much more with the tilt of a head, a raised eyebrow, a slightly flared nostril, or a wry smile. You've said so much without words. You probably picked up on extra meaning without consciously noticing the facial changes or expressions. It's just how individuals communicate. When you speak to a group, however, it doesn't quite work that way. You're 10 or more feet away usually. People are going to miss those subtleties. So when you're speaking, go big with your facial expressions. Make your smile bigger, open your mouth wider, open your eyes wide, tilt your head far, not just a little. It will feel silly at first, especially when you practice in a mirror, but you know what? That's okay. You need to think comically big because you are not going to go too far with your facial expressions. This is how you communicate with a group. And when you do this, your audience will understand more because they are picking up those expressions consciously and subconsciously. They're going to pay more attention to you even if they don't quite know why. And you're just going to seem more vibrant and alive. So put on a big face for your next talk. Stick around, and after the break, we're going to talk about how to memorize a speech. I've been to a lot of trade shows over the years, and I've worked at a lot of trade shows over the years. One of the things you will notice if you go to enough of the big shows like the CESs of the world is that a lot of companies will use spokesmodels at their booths. And spokesmodels are different from the scantily clad booth babes that have begun falling out of favor. The spokesmodels, especially at the big booths, will often conduct presentations for companies throughout the day to, large groups of attendees. Maybe these presentations happen every hour or every 2 hours to introduce a new product, a company overview, a technology. There's all sorts of different reasons to do it. Sometimes these presentations are carefully choreographed demonstrations that have critical timing as a part of them. And yet, most of these speakers do not actually work for the company they are speaking for. They are hired for the event. At one show, they may be talking about an airline. At the next, it's going to be a commercial mixing board. And then at the next show, they may be introducing a brand new MRI machine. They don't know the products or the industry. It's not their job. But what they do know is the script. They have it memorized. And if you see them in the green room between shows, many of them are listening to recordings of their speech to reinforce it in their brains. Or they're listening to a recording of next week's speech to work on memorizing that one. And different spokesmodels will use other techniques as well. So this week, let's talk about rote memory of your speech. Now, this can be a tricky topic because to begin with, I generally recommend don't memorize, internalize. It is a personal choice, but there are a lot of problems with memorization. First of all, it's a lot of work to memorize something when that time could be better spent rehearsing. Second, if you're speaking and you have your speech memorized and you encounter brain freeze, that can be a much bigger problem for getting your talk going again. Third, getting back to where you belong in your speech if you lose your place is a lot more challenging than if you just have it internalized. Another problem is that you're much more likely to sound robotic when you're working from rote memory. And finally, it's a lot harder to adapt your talk if something changes at the last minute and you need to add in something else or pull something from there. Of course, all of this can be overcome, but it does add to the challenge of conducting your presentation. So what do I mean when I say don't memorize, internalize? What I mean is that generally you should know your material so well that you can say nearly the same thing every time without actually pulling those sentences from memory. Essentially, you generate the same talk each time you conduct it. Now, even if you do this, there are certain parts you should memorize. About a year ago, I talked about the importance of memorizing your introduction. You want to memorize your intro so that you open solid while you're getting into the flow of the talk on the stage. You want to memorize your conclusions so that you have that practiced so well, you wrap up strong so that when folks are leaving your session, they leave with the exact thought and feeling you want them to leave with. You want to memorize your structure so that you always know where you are and where you're going in your talk, especially if you're not using your slides. And finally, you want to memorize any key quotes that are in your talk because, well, they're not your words, so you have to get them exact. Now, if you do this well enough, you won't need to pull the rest of your speech from memory. But sometimes there are other considerations that may override wanting to have just a really dynamic presentation. Sometimes you do have to actually memorize. Some of those examples might include a specific script that's been written and approved by multiple folks, like the scripts that the spokesmodels at trade shows are often delivering. Your speech could involve legal or financial disclosures or talks in those highly regulated industries where each and every word is absolutely critical. At certain international events, you may be working with a translator or an interpreter who has reviewed the speech ahead of time so they can provide a more effective translation for the audience. Perhaps you're speaking about crisis management in a public relations context when the eyes of the world are suddenly on your organization and you need to get it right. And there are certain technical discussions where each and every detail does matter and has to be done right word for word. And in those cases, yeah, you are going to have to memorize, and there could be others that arise from different business conditions. Now, in many of these cases, you may have a script or a teleprompter in front of you, which makes it a little bit easier. But you still should be memorized in these cases. You want to use that script or that teleprompter as a backup, as something to fall back on if you make a mistake, if you forget something, not something to rely on exclusively, because, well, anything can happen. So if you're in this situation, how do you do it? Lots of folks are going to have their own process. You need to find what works for you. I recommend these 8 steps if you don't already have an effective process for yourself. First, get input on the script. If your role is such that you can write the script or influence the script, do it. The more it reflects your natural cadence, your word choice, your sentence structure, the easier it's going to be for you to memorize because you don't have to get into somebody else's pattern of speech. Second, don't start memorizing until you have the final version in front of you. I mean, sure, you can start practicing and rehearsing with a draft and try stuff out and try out some staging, but don't spend the work to memorize an early draft because an early draft will change. And you don't want old paragraphs cluttering up your brain when you're trying to pull the right ones from your memory for your speech. Third, make sure you read it out all the way through and do that out loud. Hearing that script and moving your mouth will help with the context of that speech. It will help you discover awkward phrases and verbal stumbling blocks, and it will help you find questions that you may have about the content that you should ask about before you go ahead and get everything memorized, in case something is wrong or in case something needs to change, or just in case you need more context to make it easier for you to memorize. Fourth, repeat the structure until you have it memorized. You want to lock down the structure of the talk first. It's a lot easier to retain the details of the presentation if you already have all of the context clear. You want to know where you're going, where you are, and where you've been in that speech at every time. Because if something changes, if you do stumble, having the structure memorized will make it easier to go back and get back to where you need to be. It will also help as you start memorizing later sections piece by piece to know where they fit into the overall thing. You want to make sure that your entire speech then essentially becomes a story that you are telling from memory rather than just a list of random words that you have memorized in sequence. Also, if you can't easily discern the structure of that talk from the script probably still needs more work. Fifth, say the first paragraph out loud again and again. Each time you do that, look at the script less and less until you can do the entire first paragraph flawlessly without looking at the script. Sixth, when you've got that down, go on to the second paragraph and say that out loud and do that again and again. Now, here's where you make a little bit of a change. Every fifth time or so that you go through that second paragraph, go back to the previous paragraph you memorized and speak them together. So now you do the second paragraph again and again and again and again and again. And once you've hit the fifth time, then you do the first and second paragraph together to make sure that you have them both memorized. And then you go back and do the second again and again and again and again, and then do the first and second again so that you're building that together in your mind. Keep following that pattern until that second paragraph is stuck in your memory. If you make a mistake while doing that, especially while going through the first and second together, go back to the beginning of the first and do it again until you can get through those paragraphs flawlessly. If you make a mistake in one sentence, don't just go on to the next one. Go back to the beginning and do that again so you can get through that flawlessly. Now, this is something I would never advise you to do during the actual live presentation. In live presentation, if you make a mistake, the vast majority of the time, you're just going to want to keep going and go through, and your audience is never going to notice. But you're not in that live context right now. You're in the context of memorizing the speech and memorizing the talk. People say practice makes perfect, but they're wrong. Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Don't reinforce your mistakes in the practice phase. Go ahead and get it right at this point. So now, after you've done paragraphs 1 and 2, go and do the same thing with paragraphs 2 and 3. Repeat paragraph 3 again and again and again and again, and then go back to the beginning of paragraph 2 and do 2 and 3 together, and then do 3 again and again and again and again, and then go back to 2 and do 2 and 3 together again, and keep doing that. Then, when you have 3 memorized, go to 4 and do 4 again and again and again, and then do 3 and 4, and repeat this pattern until you've gone through the entire speech. So it's 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, 5 and 6, etc. And basically just lather, rinse, repeat as you go through the whole thing. Step number 7. When you get to the end of this and you've memorized each of those paragraphs, and it may take hours or days depending on your speech and your experience with this, go back to the very beginning and say it again from memory. If you mess up, go back to the beginning and try again. And keep doing this until you can get through the whole thing. And that brings us to step number 8. Now you're going to want to record your talk. Go ahead and go through your talk and record it on your phone or another device, and then play it back, again and again, while you even do other stuff. You want it flowing into your head in the background of your life. Maybe it's playing on your car radio while you're driving to work. Maybe it is playing through your headphones while you're doing dishes, and after you've listened to the latest episode of 2-Minute Talk Tips. And just keep doing this. Keep having it playing in the background there. See, now that you've gone through those 8 steps, and now that you have it memorized, you can practice delivering that memorized talk. And don't just go through it in your head. You have to say it out loud. Because when you do this in your head, you engage only a small part of your brain. Once you say it out loud, you engage a lot more. You engage the content memory, which pulls the speech from memory. You engage the language center, as you're actually attaching the physical words to those concepts you pulled from the content memory. You're engaging your motor cortex as that moves your mouth and moves your tongue and moves your diaphragm to force the air through your vocal cords and to make those words come out of your mouth. You're engaging your auditory processing as you hear those words as you say them. And in fact, if you do a lot of visualization, you're engaging your visual cortex too if you visualize the script as you say it out loud. It also makes you breathe more, so you're bringing in more oxygen to your brain. Stand while you do it, since you'll likely be standing while you speak, and you want to make the brain associate the body position with these words. As you go through that 8-step memorization process, you can work with a paper script. That can be a great tool. You can also use a teleprompter app on your tablet or your PC. Just check the appropriate app store on your device and look for teleprompter. That can be a nice tool that will let it scroll past you while you go through your rehearsal and while you go through your practice. You see, this practice and this rehearsal is critical to reinforcing that 8-step memorization process. One of the core principles of brain recovery and training is neuroplasticity, and we want to take advantage of that. Because if you do something often enough, the neurons, the nerve cells in your brain, realign to make it easier to do that in the future. The principle is that cells that fire together wire together. One of the things I've come to realize is that the brain is actually like a series of dirt roads out in the country that maybe lead to the lake, lead to a campsite, lead to some hiking trails, lead to the store, whatever it is. This process is actually why I can walk today after my stroke last summer. You see, the brain is made up of all of these dirt roads. These dirt roads are filled with ruts. Those ruts make it easy to get to and from the destinations we're always going to. They carve that path directly there. When my stroke happened last summer, essentially it was like a rainstorm that wiped out a whole bunch of those dirt roads, wiped out all of those ruts. And so the process of learning to walk again and going through recovery is the process of rebuilding those ruts and digging those new ruts. And when we do that memorization process for a speech and we rehearse it and practice and engage all those different parts of the brain, we are digging more and more ruts for that speech. When we force ourselves to memorize something by doing it again and again and again, we are forcing that neuroplastic change in the brain in a brute force manner. Each rep is another trip to the lake, and we carve those ruts deeper. We build stronger and stronger memories and connections so we can pull them more easily in the future with much less effort. And the more parts of the brain that we bring to the party, the more effective we'll be in the future. So that's it. The 8 steps to memorizing a speech are: number 1, get script input. Number 2, wait for the final version. Number 3, read it out loud. Number 4, memorize the structure. Number 5, memorize the first paragraph. Number 6, memorize paragraphs 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, then 3 and 4, until you run out of paragraphs to memorize. Number 7, go through the entire thing from memory. Number 8, record it and play it back repeatedly. Unless you have to follow the script word for word, don't memorize, internalize. But that's not always the world we live in. If you do sometimes have to memorize, what techniques do you use? Let us know in the comments over at 2minutetalktips.com/memorize. In your next talk, make sure you are using big facial expressions. If you like this episode, go ahead and share it with a friend or colleague, and subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode of 2-Minute Talk Tips. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
2-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.